Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook for February through May 2022. Over the last 30 days, we've seen warmer conditions over the southern two-thirds of the Great Basin with above normal temperatures and also very dry conditions, with only storms bringing some precipitation to parts of Idaho and Wyoming into northern Utah, but much of the rest of the southern half of the Great Basin is well below normal. Also, with this precipitation up north, we have seen some cooler temperatures across Idaho into Wyoming. Since the beginning of the water year in October 1st, 2021, we've seen above normal precipitation over parts of the Sierra into western Nevada, both from storms earlier in the season back in November and December, and then also a couple of weeks ago. Also, we've seen near to above normal precipitation across Idaho, Wyoming, and parts of the northern half of Utah. The very dry spots are still the southern third of the Great Basin. Currently, there's no large incidents across the Great Basin, which would be normal for the time of year. Our snowpack has dwindled some in the recent weeks with the warm and dry conditions and has generally dropped to near normal across much of the Great Basin. There are a few spots below normal over parts of northern Nevada into southern Idaho, and also a few spots still above normal over parts of the far southern areas of the Great Basin due to some bigger storms we had earlier in the season. However, that continues to drop. Soil moistures have been near to just below normal across the Great Basin. 10-hour fuel moisture is significantly dry over the southern half of the Great Basin. Again, with these warm and dry conditions, the fine fuels certainly dry out faster. Further north, we're still sitting fairly wet across the northern areas. 100-hour fuel moisture shows that similar trend. The driest conditions are over the southern half of the Great Basin. And similarly, 1,000-hour fuel moisture is also driest in the southern half to third of the Great Basin, between about 10 and 15%. The evaporative demand drought index shows shorter changes in drought across the area. And you can see across the Great Basin, drought is still really not a factor, at least in the shorter term, just with some wetter systems we had recently. And again, that continues to linger, keeping that evaporative demand drought index, again, fairly high. However, looking at our longer term drought, you can see we have had significant improvements over the southern half of the Great Basin from storms we saw back in November and December, and then a couple of weeks ago as well. However, we still have drought remaining. The more significant areas are still over south central into eastern Nevada and western Utah, also over parts of southeast Utah where the drought continues to be extreme to exceptional. Other areas the drought has dropped to severe and even has dropped to moderate over parts of the Sierra into western Nevada and southern Idaho. Now, this is definitely good news for our higher elevation, larger timber fuels. However, for our lower elevations, when we see the drought start to diminish, that also means we've been getting moisture, and we'll be looking at fine fuel growth, especially in these areas of western and northwest Nevada and southern Idaho. That certainly can be problematic in the fire season if we get quite a bit of new growth. We'll continue to monitor that over the next couple of months. Looking at the drought outlook, we're not looking at any significant changes in drought across much of the Great Basin, but we will continue to see some improvements across parts of Idaho and Wyoming, which is where the storm track has been most active. So now that we've put all that together, we'll look at the future forecasts of some of our conditions, one being the El Nino La Nina scenario. We continue to remain in a weak state of La Nina, but looking at some of the forecast models, this upward trend of the slope of the line shows that we'll likely be coming out of La Nina and heading into a neutral status for much of the fire season, and then looks like we'll stay in that neutral status going into the fall. There are a couple of anomalies that push us well into El Nino and back into La Nina, but again, those are some of the outliers at this time, so we are at least looking in the short term into the beginning of the fire season for some warming of the ocean temperatures, pushing us back into neutral. Looking at our 8 to 14-day outlook from February 8th to the 14th, showing cooler conditions over the eastern half of the Great Basin and continued warmer conditions out west. And then looking at the precipitation, showing above normal conditions mainly in the Rockies and still drier conditions across much of the Great Basin. So we are looking to stay fairly dry through at least mid-February. Looking at some of the outlooks for the individual months coming up. For February, again, kind of cooler, drier signature for the Great Basin. As we go into March and April, we are still continuing that cooler trend up north with warmer conditions down south, and again, drier conditions continue over the southern half of the Great Basin, but we should have some storms continue to push across northern areas, bringing moisture at times, especially to Idaho and Wyoming, possibly northern Nevada and Utah at times as well. But it is still looking for the next several months for the southern areas of the Great Basin to stay quite dry and on the warmer side. As we get into May, this is when we typically start to see our fine fuels and much of our fuel moisture start to drop. We are looking at warmer and drier conditions for much of the Great Basin, so we'll be watching that period of time. Depending on how much moisture we get here over the next couple of months, will determine how much fine fuel growth we have, and that will certainly become a factor as we get into this warmer, drier trend heading towards fire season. So this is another look at some of our outlooks. This is from the Climate Prediction Center for February, again showing that warm and dry conditions over much of the southern half of the Great Basin, which is consistent with our Predictive Services outlooks. And then looking at March through May, the 3-month period, showing generally warm and dry for the southern areas, and again, a better chance of some moisture and cooler temperatures affecting Idaho and Wyoming into far northern Nevada and Utah. So putting everything together, we're just looking for normal conditions for February, March, and April. Again, showing generally low fire potential, low fire activity, which would be normal for that time of year. And then looking into May, we still have normal at this time. We will be watching some of our southern areas of the Great Basin. Depending on how dry things get, we might see an early start to the fire season in the far south, and then we'll continue to watch the grass growth further north for later in the fire season. That concludes our seasonal outlook for this month. Check back in March for our next update.